So a friend of mine has this 2003 Mustang GT. It actually has been around town a little bit. I had a couple other people I knew who had owned the car, and it was a nice car. It had higher mileage on it, but it was still a nice car. And the current owner contacted me, and he had talked to me before because he actually got into a little bit of an accident with it and messed it up a little bit, but we had talked back and forth, but then he messaged me one night and said, I cannot get this car to start for the life of me. I'm having a problem with it. I'm turning the key and I'm not getting anything. And so I started talking back and forth with him about it and trying to figure out what could be wrong. And, I have this happen all the time. I have 1,000 messages in my Instagram inbox, and people asking me, what could this be? How come it's not starting? And, trying to diagnose something over the phone is extremely difficult because you can't see anything there. Sometimes you'll diagnose the problem and find out that they had messed something up and they didn't tell you about it, which is the nice thing to do is to just be honest up front and say, okay, well, I did this and this and this. Don't be afraid to tell somebody what you've done to a car, because that could be the reason it's not working. And, there's no shame in just disclosing anything up front. And in this case, he hadn't done anything to the car like that he wasn't telling me about. He just said, I drove it home one day, and the next day I went out to leave, and it would not start for the life of me. It wouldn't do anything. So thinking, okay, it doesn't sound like it's something that had been altered. It's just, in that case, sounds like a fuse or a switch or something like that. And these cars are getting old, so it's very possible it could be an ignition switch or it could be a clutch safety switch or something. And so he had put a new starter in the car and said it's still not doing anything, because sometimes the starter solenoid will get jammed up, and some people will whack the starter with a hammer, and sometimes that frees it up, and then it gets going, which working on the starter, you always want to disconnect the battery because you can reach up in there and get shocked. And as a matter of fact, he even took a screwdriver with the key on and he tried to jump the starter itself up, underneath the car, and he did get the starter to spin, but it wouldn't crank. So he was wondering, why is it doing that? And I said, well, the starter has kind of two functions, like a solenoid part inside that moves the actual starter gear forward and back and spins it, and then there's the part that actually turns the motor so it can turn the crankshaft. So otherwise the starter would always be right next to the flywheel and it would be getting beat up all the time. So there's kind of some other functions of the starter. So he was getting the starter to do part of what it's made to do, but not to crank. And so he was wondering if it was a bad starter, and it could be, because there's always a possibility of getting a bad new part. And so basically he was at a loss. He's like, I cannot do anything with this. I need your help. Can you please come look at the car? And so it's about a 20-minute drive each way, and obviously he can't bring the car to me because it doesn't run. And, I thought it'd be nice to just have it at my house where I could look it over for a while and see what the problem is. And but that wasn't the case, so I actually took two of my kids with me, and I packed up all the things that I thought I would need, and I went to go diagnose the issue and try to figure it out. And so that in itself was a lot. I had to get like a floor jack and everything. I had to get a whole bunch of stuff, and I made a list of all the things that I wanted to take with me so that I'd have everything I needed there on the spot. So here's packing up and ready to go. Alright, so I got everything in here that I'm going to need. Battery, an extra CCRM, tools, jack, starter, relays and fuses, electrical tape, test light, jump wire, gloves, flashlight, fire extinguisher, this carpet to lay on, and my coveralls. So I made it to the car, and I was happy to see that he had it up on ramps already. I still needed to use my floor jack on some part of it, but at least it was kind of already up in the air so I could look underneath it and trace wires and stuff. And you can see the car has a little bit of damage since the last time I saw it, but It's still a pretty cool car. Dark Shadow Gray Mustang GT 2003. Good looking car. But anyway, I got here and I got the tools out and everything and started going over everything, just trying to figure out what the issue could be. And I wanted to start by tracing some wires and figuring out why the car wouldn't start. And I did think that there's a way you can jump the relay and see if the engine will start. It basically bypasses everything from the fuse box back, everything back here towards the inside. Now, there are these safety switches. I have them unplugged so I could jump them. These two are clutch safety switches, and I'll show you more of that here in a minute. But with the car neutral and those switches satisfied, because if one of the switches was bad, then you could have an issue. Then you can see where the issue's coming from. So here's the starter. I wanted to make sure the wires were all plugged in right and bolted in right, and that was all okay. This is the CCRM and the fender well, so I'll get to that. I'll show you a little bit more of that on my other car. We'll do kind of a walk around my other car. But this was an issue here. I redid this and wrapped it tight with electrical wire. This was a new connector here, but it was still really loose, so I got it all bolted in tight and wrapped it and everything to make sure that it wasn't a ground issue. I actually had this issue with my friend's Black Mach 1. He'd go to turn the key and everything would just go dead, and it's because this was loose. And even in my Blue Mach 1, when I bought it, this little section here was loose, and so I'd hit a bump and it would shut the car off out of nowhere. And I finally figured out that was loose. So I wanted to make sure that all the connections were good first. And I got that all on. And then I went ahead and jumped the starter motor relay, and I got it to run. Do a walk around with my yellow GT here in a second. I'll show you where all this is and how it works. But basically, this is the fuse box in the engine compartment, and the bottom of the screen there is where it would be facing the engine. And so you do have to kind of turn the diagram when you're working on the car and figure it out. But you can see that the relay is number 4 for the starter motor. And we'll be going inside the car too, and fuse 6 is the one that is the starter motor relay as well. So it's the one on the left there, the second row down, and the first one on the left. So basically, let's kind of go over everything. When you're having issues like this, it's always important to check your grounds first. And there are some grounds right here that go to the ECU, and they go to different things, the PCM, computer, basically the car. And there's always the possibility that these cylinder plugs here, there's 2 of them, that those that supply, ground and power to the computer and starter and stuff, those can get unplugged. And usually when they get unplugged, you get the dashes across the odometer, and that's saying that the PCM is not communicating or that there's a ground issue. And so he wasn't having that problem. I asked him first off, do you have the odometer light up with the mileage? And he said yes. And so it's not likely, but it still could have been an issue with that, plus the CCRM, which is the constant control relay something. Okay, I was pretty close, just off the top of my head. Constant Control Relay Module is what it stands for. And, when you're having issues such as the cooling fan, AC clutch, fuel pump driver module, which is why maybe the car wouldn't start if it was cranking, or the PCM, which is the computer, PCM power relay. Basically, it's a box with relays in it, and any of those issues could be caused by this box going out. So people have traded them out in the past, and it has fixed starting issues for them. But like I said, usually you'd have the dashes across the odometer or a clicking noise coming from the CCRM. And from what I understand, there's just a bunch of relays inside that box, and so you could be having problems with that. And this is something that might have just gone bad because of what he has told me on the diagnosis. But anyway, This is the CCRM, and it basically has a bunch of relays inside of it. And if you look up in there, it's not super hard to get to. You know, you have the wheel liner and everything in there, but you have to get like I think it was a 5mm, and you unbolt it here, and you just pull the whole plug off as you unbolt it. And so I wanted to trade that out because sometimes that'll be your issue, but usually it also would have the dashes across the cluster, or there'll be clicking noises coming from it or something. So I had an extra one of those, and I thought go ahead and bring one of those. And so we checked all the grounds out, made sure there's even one that goes from the engine to the frame down below. But that one doesn't seem as necessary, and I had a GT that I was driving around for a while that didn't even have that. I looked underneath and noticed that it was gone, so I added it later, but it wasn't something that was causing the issue of it not starting. But basically, I wanted to get under here and check. And if you look through here, it might be hard to see, but the starter, if you look through the K-member, you can see the starter there, okay? And I just wanted to make sure that that was all plugged in right. And also, I want to take the time to say that you want to make sure the wires aren't touching each other or grounding out on the body. I've seen that happen as well. That those wires were all correct. And then I traced them, because the harness for that starter is right here by the oil pan. You can see. And, you know, there's the possibility that driving down the road, you know, catch that on something, or, you know, it gets snagged or cut. And, but anyway, traced all those wires all the way up to here, just to make sure. See, I believe these are starter wires here, just to make sure that nothing was messed up with the starter or cut. And then in the fuse box, it's always a good idea to check here. See, on this car, this fuse was blown, and that was causing the dashes on the odometer on this car. And so anyway, I went through and I tested all the fuses just to make sure, because sometimes an awkward issue can be caused by a fuse that doesn't even have anything to do with what you're looking at. But the starter relay is the fourth one back. 1, 2, 3, 4. This one here. And so you can swap it with a different relay that's like the same and see if maybe it's the relay. A lot of times it's not the relay. But anyway, that was the next thing I wanted to do, was eliminate the issue from the box to the starter versus the box to the car, because that's where the issue was. We wanted to know if the starter was still working. Okay, he had put a brand new starter in it, and you never know when something from here to there has been destroyed, like a wire or something like that. To test that, obviously first making sure the car's in neutral and that there's nobody around, because if you're starting it and the car's in gear, it could go, so you got to be careful with that. And basically what we're doing here is we are closing the circuits in here to bypass everything from this point to the starter forward. So we're kind of bypassing the whole inside of the car and all the safety switches and the key. But obviously, for everything to work right, the key has to be in the ignition, and it has to be cycled forward so that the anti-theft system and everything's satisfied. You take out this relay, and then you jump a wire from the front and the back posts. And with the key on and the car neutral, or park if it's an automatic, you know, you'd put it in neutral or park, and then have the key in the ignition to the on position but not crank. Then that's a way to get the car to start, and then you know whether the issue is coming from, you know, from this side or not, or the other side. You know, you test all of your fuses, of course, to make sure that they work. And this one right here is fuse number 6. This one right here. Okay. Tricky part about this is the fuse isn't going to light up until the clutch is down and the car's actually cranking. The key has to be all the way forward. So you're just testing for power there, but the fuse will only light up when the key is completely cycled forward and you have the clutch here, okay? When you push the clutch in, there's a little switch here. See that? And there's another one up in here. Right, so this one's kind of difficult to see here, but there's that gray box there with the red and white wires coming out of. That's the other switch here. And when you push the clutch up and down, there's like a plunger, this kind of yellowish plastic right here. You can see it moving in and out of itself right now. See that? That's the other one. So to satisfy those switches, you can try to unplug them and put a fuse in it or jump the wires or whatever, but it's hard to know whether the switches have gone bad because that sounds like something that would be wrong with a car. You know, you put the clutch in and nothing happens and maybe the switches are bad. And I think that even happened on my Bullet once. I went to start and there was absolutely nothing. And the dome light didn't like dim or go off or anything. Like you turn the key and nothing happened. You'd have the dome light, but nothing happened. So basically, we figured out that the car will start and run, so it's not the starter, it's nothing from, that side. It had to be from here back. An ignition switch, a clutch safety switch, a fuse, a wire, something like that. So behind the key here, there is an actual switch for the ignition. I'll show you underneath here. I believe I can see it. There's also a ring here that has a bolt going through it, that secures it with a wire harness, and that has been known to go bad on some of these. It doesn't communicate with the key, and you get the dashes. But you have these 3 plugs here. I believe one of those goes to the ring around the ignition, and so it's kind of easy. It's just one little harness and plug, and like you'd have the dashes and it wouldn't start. And so that was something, the theft light blinking and stuff. And I believe the actual starter switch is this white box here, if I'm not mistaken. But underneath there is a starter switch, so that always could be. He thought that's probably what it was. That would be, a good thing to think, okay, the car hasn't done anything differently, and all of a sudden it's not working now, so it's very possible it's just a bad switch. And so we knew it was from their back. It was not the switch. It still had the problem. And so, we went over all this trying to trace down things. And then he thought, well, maybe it's the alternator because he got the car running, but the lights were flickering and having issues. And so I had an extra alternator. And so I let him come borrow the alternator and see if that was the issue, because Wyatt Anderson, who's been a good help, he sent me some diagrams and everything for the starting system. He'd had an issue with a friend's GT where the alternator had an issue inside and it was killing the car, but at least the car was starting. And so in this case, it wasn't the alternator, but we're like, okay, it's got to be something. And so he knew it was from the fuse box back, and so he took off the fenders, took off the wheel lining, and he started tracing wires, and that's when he finally found what the issue was. Drum roll, please. The issue was underneath here, where the harness travels, there are 2 connectors. Okay, there's 3. There's the main one that goes into the car here, but then up here there are 2 connectors. And I believe it was this one. It might be the one above it. But that is where the wire to the alternator went, and he was having the alternator issues, and that connector was unplugged. I don't know how that got unplugged. There's no way to diagnose that in any way, shape, or form. And like I said, this was an issue where he said the car was running fine and then it wouldn't start the next day. So you would never consider that something got unplugged somehow, because how could that even happen? I don't understand how that could have even happened. So here's another look at it. There's the 2 connectors here. I believe it was this bigger one on the bottom, but it might have been that one up there. But anyway, that was where the power went into the car for the starter and possibly even the key. And so basically, this was an issue of a car that nothing had changed on it and it wasn't running the next day. And so, funny enough, he did say there was a squirrel that he chased out from underneath the car and he beat it up with a broom. I thought that was really funny. And who knows, maybe that squirrel somehow unclipped that connector. Very unlikely. I don't know. Hey, and I doubt it was sabotage because you'd have to take the wheel liner out to get up in there and stuff. And it didn't look like it was removed. The car was in an accident, so maybe somehow that got jolted and broken and unplugged and it was barely hanging on for dear life and then it rattled loose. There's all sorts of explanations and who knows what it could be. But that's why this was so hard to diagnose. You're testing fuses and running wires, tracing wires, and you're doing everything in your power to look for something out of the ordinary, but nothing that had been altered. So I just wanted to mention all that in this video. There's crank no start issues. There's no crank no start issues. There's sometimes where you got the dashes on the odometer, the PCM's not communicating, you're not getting fuel sometimes. It could be a relay, it could be a fuel pump, it could be the CCRM in the fender, it could be the key, it could be the starter, it could be a relay, a fuse, it could be the theft light blinking for the PAT system, passive anti-theft system. There's all sorts of issues that it could possibly be. So not the easiest thing to diagnose. You can look at diagrams, you can run wires, you can use a test light. But anyway, that was the issue here. Maybe that'll help somebody in the future. I hope so. But we kind of went over a lot of things in this video to show you the possibilities of what it could be and how to diagnose it and stuff. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more Mustang content.